Then the old specimen in the corner, who appeared to have some spark of vitality left, read out that Sir Anthony MacDonald had left Euston for the Chief Secretary's lodge, or words to that effect. To which absorbing piece of intelligence Echo answered, "Why, give us a squint at that literature, grandfather," the ancient mariner put in, manifesting some natural impatience. "And welcome," answered the elderly party thus addressed. The sailor lugged out from a case he had a pair of greenish goggles which he very slowly hooked over his nose and both ears. "Are you bad in the eyes?" the sympathetic personage like the town clerk queried. "Why," answered the seafarer with the tartan beard, who seemingly was a bit of a literary cove in his own small way, staring out a sea of green portholes as you might well describe them. "I use his goggles reading. Sand in the Red Sea done that. One time I could read a book in the dark, manner of speaking. The Arabian Nights Entertainment was my favorite, and red as a rose as she." Hereupon he pawed the journal open and poured upon Lord only knows what, found drowned are the exploits of King Willow, a remonger having made 100 and something second wicket not out for naught, during which time, completely regardless of ire, the keeper was intensely occupied loosening an apparently new-wash second-hand boot which manifestly pinched him as he muttered against whoever it was sold it, all of them who were sufficiently awake enough to be picked out by their facial expressions, that is to say, either simply looking on glumly or passing a trivial remark. To cut a long story short, Bloom, grasping the situation, was the first to rise from his seat so as not to outstay their welcome, having first and foremost, being as good as his word that he would foot the bill for the occasion, taken the wise precaution to unobtrusively motion the mine host as a parting shot, a scarcely perceptible sign when the others were not looking, to the effect that the amount due was forthcoming, making a grand total of 4 pence. The amount he deposited unobtrusively in 4 coppers, literally the last of the Mohicans, he having previously spotted on the printed price list for all who ran to read opposite him in unmistakable figures, coffee second, confectionery due, and honestly well worth twice the money once in a way, as Weatherby used to remark. "Come," he counseled to close the Zayans. Seeing that the ruse worked and the coast was clear, they left the shelter of shanty together, and the Elite Society of Oilskin and Company, whom nothing short of an earthquake would move out of their dolce far 90. Stephen, who confessed to still feeling poorly and fagged out, paused at for a moment, the door. "One thing I never understood," he said to be original on the spur of the moment. "Why they put tables upside down at night, I mean chairs upside down, on the tables in cafes." To which impromptu the never-failing Bloom replied without a moment's hesitation, saying straight off, "To sweep the floor in the morning." So saying he skipped around, nimbly considering, frankly at the same time apologetic to get on his companion's right, a habit of his, by the by, his right side being, in classical idiom, his tender Achilles. The night air was certainly now a treat to breathe, though Stephen was a bit weak on his pins. "It will, the air, do you good," Bloom said, meaning also the walk, in a moment. "The only thing is to walk, then you'll feel a different man. Come. It's not far. Lean on me." Accordingly he passed his left arm on Stephen's right and led him on accordingly. "Yes," Stephen said uncertainly, because he thought he felt a strange kind of flesh of a different man approach him, sinewless and wobbly and all that. Anyhow they passed the centre box with stones, brazier etc., where the municipal supernumerary, ex-Gumley, was still to all intents and purposes wrapped in the arms of Murphy, as the adage has it, dreaming of fresh fields and pastures new. And apropos of coffin of stones, the analogy was not at all bad, as it was in fact a stoning to death on the part of 70 out of 80-odd constituencies that rided at the time of the split, and chiefly the bellotted peasant class, probably the self-same evicted tenants he had put in their holdings. So they turned on to chatting about music, a form of art for which Bloom, as a pure amateur, possessed the greatest love, as they made tracks arm in arm across Beresford Place. Wagnerian music, though confessedly grand in its way, was a bit too heavy for Bloom and hard to follow first off, but the music of Mercadante's Huguenots, Meyerbeer's 7 Last Words on the Cross, and Mozart's 12th Mass he simply reveled in, the gloria in that being, to his mind, the acme of first-class music as such, literally knocking everything else into a cocked hat. He infinitely preferred the sacred music of the Catholic Church to anything the opposite shop could offer, and that line such as those moody and saintly hymns are bid me to live and I will live thou Protestant to be. He also yielded to none in his admiration of Rossini's Stabat Mater, a work simply abounding in immortal numbers, in which his wife, Madame Marion Tweedy, made a hit, a veritable sensation, he might safely say, greatly adding to her other laurels and putting the others totally in the shade. In their Jesuit father's church in Upper Gardner Street, the sacred edifice being thronged to the doors to hear her with virtuosos, or virtuosi rather. There was the unanimous opinion that there was none to come up to her, and suffice it to say in a place of worship for music of a sacred character there was a gently voiced desire for an encore. On the whole, though favoring preferably a light opera of the Don Giovanni description in Martha, a gem in its line, he had a penchant, though with only a surface knowledge, for the severe classical school such as Mendelssohn. And talking of that, taking it for granted he knew all about the old favorites, he mentioned par excellence Lionel's air in Martha, Imapare, which, curiously enough, he had heard or overheard, to be more accurate, on yesterday, a privilege he keenly appreciated, from the lips of Stephen's respected father, sung to perfection, a study of the number, in fact, which made all the others take a back seat. Stephen, in reply to a politely put query, said he didn't sing it but launched out into praises of Shakespeare's songs, at least of in or about the period. The lutenist Dowland, who lived in Federley near Gerard the herbalist, who in Oludendo Housey, Dlandus, an instrument he was contemplating purchasing from Mr. Arnold O'Mitch, whom he did not quite recall though the name certainly sounded familiar, for 65 guineas, and Farnaby and Son with their ducks and comes conceits and bird. William, who played the virginals, he said, in the Queen's Chapel or anywhere else he found them, one Tompkins who made toys or airs, and John Bull. On the roadway which they were approaching while still speaking beyond the swing trains a horse, dragging a sweeper, paced on the paven ground, brushing a long swath of mire up so that with the noise Bloom was not perfectly certain whether he had caught aright the allusion to 65 guineas and John Bull. He inquired if it was John Bull, the political celebrity of that ilk, as it struck him, the two identical names, as a striking coincidence. By the chains the horse slowly swerved to turn, which perceiving, Bloom, who was keeping a sharp lookout as usual, plucked the other's sleeve gently, jocosely remarking, "Our lives are in peril tonight. Beware of the steam-roller." Then thereupon stopped. Bloom looked at the head of the horse, not worth anything like 65 guineas, suddenly in evidence in the dark quite near so that it seemed new, a different grouping of bones and even flesh, because palpably it was a fur walker, a hip shaker, a black batocker, a tailed angler, a head hanger putting his hind foot foremost the while the lord of his creation sat on the perch, busy with his thoughts. But such a good poor brute he was sorry he hadn't a lump of sugar, but, as he wisely reflected, you could scarcely be prepared for every emergency that might crop up. He was just a big nervous foolish noodly kind of a horse, without a second care in the world. But even a dog, he reflected, take that mongrel and Barney Kiernan's, of the same size, would be a wholly horror to face. But it was no animal's fault in particular if he was built that way, like the camel, ship of the desert, distilling grapes into potheen in his hump. 9/10 of them all could be caged or trained, nothing beyond the art of man barring the bees. Whale with a harpoon hairpin, alligator tickle the small of his back and he sees the joke, chalk a circle for a rooster, tiger my eagle eye. These timely reflections anent the brutes of the field occupied his mind, somewhat distracted from Stephen's words while the ship of the street was maneuvering, and Stephen went on about the highly interesting old. What's this I was saying? Ah, yes. My wife, he intimated, plunging in medias res, would have the greatest of pleasure in making your acquaintance, as she is passionately attached to music of any kind. He looked sideways in a friendly fashion at the sight of face of Stephen, image of his mother, which was not quite the same as the usual handsome blackguard type they unquestionably had an insatiable hankering after, as he was perhaps not that way built. Still, supposing he had his father's gift as he more than suspected, it opened up new vistas in his mind, such as Lady Fingale's Irish industries, concert on the preceding Monday, and aristocracy in general. Exquisite variations he was now describing on an air you hear his end by Jans Peter Sweeling, a Dutchman of Amsterdam, where the froze come from. Even more, he liked an old German song of Johannes Jeep about the clear sea and the voices of sirens, sweet murders of men, which boggled Bloom a bit. Wunderschöne Stichgott die Poeten dichten. These opening bars he sang of translated extempore. Bloom, nodding, said he perfectly understood and begged him to go on by all means, which he did. A phenomenally beautiful tenor voice like that, the rarest of boons, which Bloom appreciated at the very first note he got out, could easily, if properly handled by some recognized authority on voice production such as Barclay, and being able to read music into the bargain, command its own price where baritones were 10 a penny, and procure for its fortunate possessor in the near future an entree into fashionable houses in the best residential quarters of financial magnates, and a large way of business entitled people where with his university degree of B.A. a huge ad in its way, and gentlemanly bearing to all the more influence the good impression he would infallibly score a distinct success, being blessed with brains which also could be utilized for the purpose and other requisites, if his clothes were properly attended to, so as to the better worm his way into their good graces as he, a youthful tyro in society's sartorial niceties, hardly understood how a little thing like that could militate against you. It was in fact only a matter of months, and he could easily foresee him participating in their musical and artistic conversazione during the festivities of the Christmas season, for choice, causing a slight flutter in the dovecots of the fair sex and being made a lot of by ladies out for sensation, cases of which, as he happened to know, were on record. In fact, without giving the show away, he himself once upon a time, if he cared to, could easily have. Added to which of course would be the pecuniary emolument by no means to be sneezed at, going hand in hand with his tuition fees. Not, he parenthesized, that for the sake of filthy lucre he need necessarily embrace the lyric platform as a walk in life for any lengthy space of time. But a step in the required direction, it was beyond yea or nay, and both monetarily and mentally it contained no reflection on his dignity in the smallest, and it often turned in and commonly handy to be handed a check at a much-needed moment when every little helped. Besides, though taste latterly had deteriorated to a degree, original music like that, different from the conventional run, would rapidly have a great vogue, as it would be a decided novelty for Dublin's musical world after the usual hackneyed run of catchy tenor solos foisted on a confiding public by Ivan St. Austell and Hilton St. Justin the Genoson. Yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt he could with all the cards in his hand, and he hit a capital opening to make a name for himself and win a high place in the city's esteem, where he could command, figure in, booking ahead, give a grand concert for the patrons of the King Street House, given it back Europe, if one were forthcoming to kick him upstairs, so to speak. I beg if, however, with some impetus of the go-ahead sort to obviate the inevitable procrastination which often tripped up a too much faded prince of good fellows. And it need not detract from the other by one iota, as, being his own master, he would have heaps of time to practice literature in his spare moments when desires of so doing without its clashing with his vocal career or containing anything derogatory whatsoever, as it was a matter for himself alone. In fact, he had the ball at his feet, and that was the very reason why the other, possessed of a remarkably sharp nose for smelling a rat of any sort, hung on to him at all. The horse was just then, and later on at a propitious opportunity he purposed, Bloom did, without anyone prying into his private affairs, on Theophil's step in where Angel's principle, advising him to sever his connection with a certain budding practitioner who, he noticed, was prone to disparage him even to a slight extent with some hilarious pretext when not present, deprecate him, or whatever you like to call it, which in Bloom's humble opinion threw an nasty sidelight on that side of a person's character, no pun intended. The horse, having reached the end of his tether, so to speak, halted and, rearing high proud feathering tail, added his quota by letting fall on the floor, which the brush would soon brush up and polish, 3 smoking globes of turds. Slowly 3 times, one after another, from a full crupper he mired. And humanely his driver waited till he or she had ended, patient in his sidecar. Side by side Bloom, profiting by the contretemps, with Stephen passed through the gap of the chains, divided by the upright, and, stepping over a strand of mire, went across towards Gardner Street lower, Stephen singing more boldly, but not loudly, the end of the ballad. And all shift broken. The driver never said a word, good, bad or indifferent, but merely watched the 2 figures, as he sat on his low-backed car, both black, one full, one lean, walked towards the railway bridge, to be married by Father Maher. As they walked they at times stopped and walked again, continuing their tete-a-tete, which, of course, he was utterly out of, about sirens, enemies of man's reason, mingled with a number of other topics of the same category, usurpers, historical cases of the kind, while the man in the sleeper car, or you might as well call it in the sleeper car, who in any case couldn't possibly hear because they were too far, simply sat in his seat near the end of the lower Gardner Street and looked after their low-back car. What parallel courses did Bloom and Stephen follow, returning, starting united both at normal walking pace from Beresford Place? They followed in the order named lower and mid of Gardner Streets and Mount Joy Square, west, then, at reduced pace, each bearing left, Gardner's Place by an inadvertence as far as the farther corner of Temple Street, then, at reduced pace with interruptions of halt, bearing right, Temple Street, north, as far as Hardwood Place. Approaching, disparate, at relaxed walking pace they crossed both the circus before George's Church diametrically, the chord in any circle being less than the arc which it subtends. Of what did the duumvirate deliberate during their itinerary? Music, literature, Ireland, Dublin, Paris, friendship, woman, prostitution, diet, the influence of gaslight and the light of arc and glow lamps on the growth of adjoining heliotropic trees, exposed corporation emergency dust buckets, the Roman Catholic Church, ecclesiastical celibacy, the Irish nation, Jesuit education, careers, the study of medicine, the past day, the maleficent influence of the press, Stephen's collapse. Did Bloom discover common factors of similarity between their respective like and unlike reactions to experience? Both were sensitive to artistic impressions, musical in preference to plastic or pictorial. Both preferred a continental to an insular manner of life, a cisatlantic to a transatlantic place of residence. Both endeared it by early domestic training and an inherited tenacity of heterodox resistance, professed their disbelief in many orthodox religious, national, social and ethical doctrines. Both admitted the alternately stimulating and obtunding influence of heterosexual magnetism. Were their views on some points divergent? Stephen dissented openly from Bloom's views on the importance of dietary and civic self-help, while Bloom dissented tacitly from Stephen's views on the eternal affirmation of the spirit of man in literature. Bloom assented covertly to Stephen's rectification of the anachronism involved in assigning the date of the conversion of the Irish nation to Christianity from Druidism by Patrick, son of Copornus, son of Poitiers, son of Odysseus, sent by Pope Celestine in the year 432 in the reign of Lear to the year 260 or thereabouts in the reign of Cormac MacCart, died 266 AD, suffocated by imperfect deglutition of alimentate selenium turdet rosneri. The collapse which Bloom ascribed to gastric inanition and certain chemical compounds at varying degrees of adulteration and alcoholic strength, accelerated by mental exertion and the velocity of rapid circular motion in the relaxing atmosphere, Stephen attributed to the apparition of a matutinal cloud, perceived by both from two different points of observation, Sandy Cove and Dublin, at first no bigger than a woman's hand. Was there one point on which their views were equal and negative? The influence of gaslight or electric light on the growth of adjoining heliotropic trees. Had Bloom discussed similar subjects during nocturnal perambulations in the past? In 1884, with Owen Goldberg and Cecil Turnbull at night on public thoroughfares between Longwood Avenue and Leonard's Corner and Sin Street and Bloomfield Avenue. In 1885, with Percy Ap John in the evenings, reclined against the wall between Gibraltarville and Bloomfield House and Crumlin, Barony of Uppercross. In 1886, occasionally with casual acquaintances and prospective purchasers on doorsteps, and front parlors, and third-class railway carriages of suburban lines. In 1888, frequently with Major Brian Tweedy and his daughter Miss Marion Tweedy, together and separately on the lounge in Matthew Dillon's house in Round Town. Once in 1892 and once in 1893 with Julius Judah Mastiansky, on both occasions in the parlor of his Bloom's house in Lombard Street West. What reflection concerning the irregular sequence of dates 1884, 1885, 1886, 1888, 1892, 1893, 1904 did Bloom make before their arrival at their destination? He reflected that the progressive extension of the field of individual development and experience was regressively accompanied by a restriction of the converse domain of inter-individual relations. As in what ways? From non-existence to existence he came to many and was as one received. Existence with existence he was with any as any with any. From existence to non-existence gone he would be by all as none perceived. What act did Bloom make on their arrival at their destination? At the house steps of the fourth of the equidifferent and even numbers, number 7 Eccles Street, he inserted his hand mechanically into the back pocket of his trousers to obtain his latchkey. Was it there? It was in the corresponding pocket of the trousers which he had worn on the day but one preceding. Why was he doubly irritated? Because he had forgotten and because he remembered that he had reminded himself twice not to forget. What were then the alternatives before the premeditatedly, prospectively, and inadvertently keyless couple? To enter or not to enter? The knock or not to knock? Bloom's decision. A stratagem. Resting his feet on the dwarf wall, he climbed over the area railings, compressed his hat on his head, grasped 2 points of the lower union of rails and stiles, lowered his body gradually by its length of 5 feet 9 inches and a half the width and 2 feet 10 inches of the area pavement, and allowed his body to move freely in space by separating himself from the railings and crouching in preparation for the impact of the fall. Did he fall? By his body's known weight of 11 stone and 4 pounds in a Voyardipus measure, is certified by the graduated machine for periodical self-weighing in the premises of Francis Frodman, pharmaceutical chemist of 19 Frederick Street, Naworth, on the last feast of the Ascension, twit, the 12th day of May of the bissextile year 1904 of the Christian era, Jewish year 5664, Mohammedan year 1322, golden number 5, epoch 13, solar cycle 9, Dominical letter CB, Roman addition 2, Julian period 6617, McMeave. Did he rise uninjured by concussion? Regaining new stable equilibrium, he rose uninjured though concussed by the impact, raised the latch of the area door by the exertion of force at its freely moving flange and by leverage of the first kind applied at its fulcrum, gained retarded access to the kitchen through the subadjacent scullery, ignited a lucifer match by friction, set free inflammable coal gas by turning on the vent cock, lit a high flame which, by regulating, he reduced the quiescent incandescence and lit finally a portable candle. What discrete succession of images did Stephen meanwhile perceive? Reclined against the area railings he perceived through the transparent kitchen panes a man regulating a gas flame of 14 cp, a man lighting a candle of 1 cp, a man removing and turning each of his 2 boots, a man leaving the kitchen holding a candle. Did the man reappear elsewhere? After a lapse of 4 minutes the glimmer of his candle was discernible through the semi-transparent semicircular glass fanlight over the hall door. The hall door turned gradually on its hinges. In the open space of the doorway the man reappeared without his hat, with his candle. Did Stephen obey his sign? Yes, entering softly, he helped it close and chained the door and followed softly along the hallway the man's back and listed feet and lighted candle past a lighted crevice of doorway on the left and carefully down the turning staircase of more than 5 steps into the kitchen of Bloom's house. What did Bloom do? He extinguished the candle by sharp expiration of breath upon its flame, drew 2 spoon-seat dill chairs to the hearthstone, one for Stephen with its back to the area window, the other for himself when necessary, knelt on one knee, composed in the grate a pair of cross-laid resin sticks and various colored papers and irregular polygons of best Abraham coal and 21 shillings a ton from the yard of Mistress Flower and M. Donald at 14 D'Olier Street, kindled it at 3 projecting points of paper with 1 ignited lucifer match, thereby releasing the potential energy contained in the fuel by allowing its carbon and hydrogen elements to enter into free union with the oxygen of the air. Of what similar apparitions did Stephen think? Of others elsewhere in other times who, kneeling on one knee or on 2, had kindled fires for him. Of Brooklyn Infirmary of the College of the Society of Jesus at Clongoweswood, Salins, in the county of Kildare, of his father, Simon Dedalus, in an unfurnished room of his first residence in Dublin, number 13 Fitzgibbon Street, of his godmother Miss Kate Morgan in the house of her dying sister Miss Julia Morgan at 15 Usher's Island, of his Aunt Sarah, wife of Richard Goulding, in the kitchen of their lodgings at 62 Clonbrassil Street, of his mother Mary, wife of Simon Dedalus, in the kitchen of number 12 North Richmond Street on the morning of the feast of St. Francis Xavier 1898, of the Dean of Studies, Father Buck, in the Physics Theatre of University College, 16 Stevens Green, Naworth, of his sister Delia, and his father's house in Carrborough. What did Stephen see on raising his gaze to the height of a yard from the fire towards the opposite wall? Under a row of 5 coiled spring houseables a curvilinear rope, stretched between 2 holdfasts worked across the recess beside the chimney pier, from which hung 4 small-sized square handkerchiefs folded unattached consecutively in adjacent rectangles in one pair of ladies' grey hose with lisle suspender tops and feet in their habitual position claimed by 3 erect wooden pegs 2 at their outer extremities and the at their point of junction. What did Bloom see on the range? On the right, smaller, hollow blue enameled saucepan, on the left, larger, hollow black iron kettle. What did Bloom do at the range? He removed the saucepan to the left hob, rose and carried the iron kettle to the sink in order to tap the current by turning the faucet to let it flow. Did it flow? Yes. From Roundwood Reservoir in County Wicklow of a cubic capacity of 2,400 million gallons, percolating through a subterranean aqueduct and filter mains at single and double piping constructed at an initial plant cost of £5 per linear yard by way of the Driggle, Rathdown, Glen of the Downs and Callawhill to the 26-acre reservoir at Stillorgan, a distance of 22 statute miles, and thence, through a system of relieving tanks, by a gradient of 250 feet to the city boundary at Eustace Bridge, up Releasing Street, though from prolonged summer drought and daily supply of 12.5 million gallons the water had fallen below the sill of the overflow well, for which reason the borough surveyor and waterworks engineer, Mr. Spencer Hardy, C.E., on the instructions of the Waterworks Committee had prohibited the use of municipal water for purposes other than those of consumption, envisaging the possibility of recourse being had to the imputable water of the Grand and Royal Canals as in 1893, particularly as the South Dublin Guardians, notwithstanding the ration of 15 gallons per day per pauper supplied through a 6-inch meter, had been convicted of the wastage of 20,000 gallons per night by a reading of their meter on the affirmation of the law agent of the corporation, Mr. Ignatius Rice, solicitor, thereby acting to the detriment of another section of the public, self-supporting taxpayers, solvent, sound. What in water did Bloom, water lever, jar of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire its universality, its democratic equality and constancy to its nature and seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the sun-dammed trench of the Pacific exceeding 8,000 fathoms, the restlessness of its waves and its surface particles visiting in turn all points of its sea bower, the independence of its units, the variability of states of sea, its hydrostatic quiescence and calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides, its subsidence after devastation, its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic, its climatic and commercial significance, its preponderance of 3-to-1 over the dry land of the globe, its indisputable hegemony extending in square leagues over all the region below the subequatorial Tropic of Capricorn, the multi-secular stability of its primeval basin, its luteofulvous bed, its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances including millions of tons of the most precious metals, its slow erosions of peninsulas and islands, its persistent formation of mathetic islands, peninsulas and downward-tending promontories, its alluvial deposits, its weight and volume and density, its imperturbability in lagoons and highland tarns, its gradation of colors in the torriding temperate and frigid zones, its vehicular ramifications and continental lake contained streams and confluent ocean-flowing rivers with their tributaries and transoceanic currents, Gulf Stream, north and south equatorial courses, its violence and sea cakes, waterspouts, artesian wells, eruptions, torrents, eddies, freshets, spates, groundswells, watersheds, water poutings, geysers, cataracts, whirlpools, maelstroms, inundations, deluges, cloudbursts, its vast circumterrestrial horizontal curve, its secrecy and springs and latent humidity revealed by rhabdomanthic or hygrometric instruments and exemplified by the well by the hole in the wall at Ashton Gate, saturation of air, distillation of dew, the simplicity of its composition, 2 constituent parts of hydrogen with 1 constituent part of oxygen, its healing virtues, its buoyancy in the waters of the Dead Sea, its persevering penetrativeness in runnels, gullies, inadequate dams, leaks on shipboard, its properties for cleansing, quenching thirst and fire, nourishing vegetation, its infallibility as paradigm and paragon, its metamorphoses as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms in loughs and bays and gulfs and bights and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of sea, its solidity and glaciers, icebergs, ice flows, its docility and working hydraulic mill wheels, turbines, dynamos, electric power stations, bleach works, tanneries, scotch mills, its utility in canals, rivers, if navigable, floating and graving docks, its potentiality derivable from harnessed tides or watercourses falling from level to level, its submarine fauna and flora, anacoustic, photophobe, numerically, if not literally, the inhabitants of the globe, its ubiquity as constituting 90% of the human body, the noxiousness of its effluvial and lacustrine marshes, pestilential fans, faded floor water, stagnant pools in the waning moon. Having set the half-filled kettle on the now burning coals, why did he return to the still flowing tap? To wash his soiled hands with a partially consumed tablet of Barrington's lemon-flavored soap, to which paper still adhered, bought 13 hours previously for furpence and still unpaid for, and fresh cold never-changing ever-changing water and dry them, face and hands, and a long red-bordered holland cloth passed over a wooden revolving roller. What reason did Stephen give for declining Bloom's offer? That he was hydrophobe, hating partial contact by immersion or total by submersion in cold water, his last bath having taken place in the month of October of the preceding year, disliking the aqueous substances of glass and crystal, distrusting the quasities of thought and language. What impeded Bloom from giving Stephen counsels of hygiene and prophylactic, to which should be added suggestions concerning a preliminary wetting of the head and contraction of the muscles with rapid splashing of the face and neck and thoracic and epigastric region in case of river bathing, the parts of the human anatomy most sensitive to cold being the nape, stomach and inner or sole of foot. The incompatibility of aquacity with the erratic originality of genius. What additional didactic counsels did he similarly repress? Dietary, concerning the respective percentage of protein and caloric energy in bacon, salting and butter, the absence of the former in the last named and the abundance of the latter in the first named, which seemed to the host to be the predominant qualities of his guest. Confidence in himself, an equal and opposite power of abandonment and recuperation. What concomitant phenomenon took place in the vessel of liquid by the agency of fire? The phenomenon of ebullition. Fanned by a constant updraft of ventilation between the kitchen and the chimney flue, ignition was communicated from the faggots of pre-combustible fuel to polyhedral masses of bituminous coal, containing and compressed mineral form the foliated fossilized residual of primeval forests which had in turn derived their vegetative existence from the sun. Primal source of heat, radiant, transmitted through omnipresent luminiferous ditherminous ether. Heat, convected, a mode of motion developed by such combustion, was constantly and increasingly conveyed from the source of calorification to the liquid contained in the vessel, being radiated through the uneven and polished dark surface of the metal iron, in part reflected, in part absorbed, in part transmitted, gradually raising the temperature of the water from normal to boiling point. A rise in temperature expressible as the result of an expenditure of 72 thermal units needed to raise 1 pound of water from 50 degrees to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. What announced the accomplishment of this rise in temperature? A double falciform ejection of water vapor from under the kettle at both sides simultaneously. For what personal purpose could Bloom have applied the water so boiled? To shave himself. What advantages attended shaving by night? A softer beard. a softer but intentionally allowed to remain from shave to shave in its agglutinated lather, a softer skin if unexpectedly encountering female acquaintances in remote places at uncustomary hours, quiet reflections upon the course of the day, a cleaner sensation when awaking after fresher sleep since matutinal noises, premonitions and perturbations, a clattered milking, a postman's double knock, a paper reread while lathering, relathering the same spot, a shock, a shoot with thought of what he saw though fraught with not might cause a faster rate of shaving and a nick on which incision plaster with precision cut and hummock that an applied adhered, which was to be done. Why did absence of light disturb him less than presence of noise? Because of the surety of the sense of touch in his firm full masculine feminine passive active hand. What quality did it, his hand, possess, but with what counteracting influence? The operative surgical quality, but that he was reluctant to shed human blood even when the end justified the means, preferring, in their natural order, heliotherapy, psychophysical therapeutics, osteopathic surgery. What lay under exposure on the lower, middle and upper shelves in the kitchen dresser, opened by Bloom. On the lower shelf 5 vertical breakfast plates, 6 horizontal breakfast saucers on which rested inverted breakfast cups, a mustache cup, uninverted, and saucer of Crown Derby, 4 white gold-rimmed egg cups, an open chamois purse displaying coins, mostly copper, and a trail of aromatic violet comfits. On the middle shelf a chipped egg cup containing pepper, a drum of table salt, 4 conglomerated black galls in oleaginous paper, an empty pot of Pluntrey's potted meat, an oval wicker basket bedded with fiber and containing 1 Jersey pear, a half-empty bottle of William Gilby & Co.'s White and Valid port, half derobed of its swathe of coral pink tissue paper, a packet of Ipsos soluble cocoa, 5 ounces of Annalynch's Choice tea at 2/ per pound in a crinkled lead paper bag, a cylindrical canister containing the best crystallized lump sugar, 2 onions, 1, the larger, Spanish, entire, the other, smaller, Irish, bisected with augmented surface and more redolent, a jar of Irish mottled dairy's cream, a jug of brown crockery containing an agate and a quarter of sour adulterated milk, converted by heat into water, a serum and some solidified curds, which added to the quantity subtracted from Mr. Bloom's and Mrs. Fleming's breakfast, made 1 imperial pint, the total quantity originally delivered, 2 cloves, a halfpenny and a small dish containing a slice of fresh rib steak. On the upper shelf a battery of jam jars empty of various sizes and proveniences. What attracted his attention lying on the apron of the dresser? 4 polygonal fragments of 2 lacerated scarlet bedding tickets, numbered 8, 87, 88, 6. What reminiscences temporarily corrugated his brow? Reminiscences of coincidences, truth stranger than fiction, predicative of the result of the Gold Cup flat handicap, the official and definitive result of which he had read in the Evening Telegraph, late pink edition, in the cabman's shelter, at Buckbridge. Where had previous intimations of the result, effected or projected, been received by him? In Bernard Kieran's licensed premises 8, 9 and 10 Little Britain Street, in David Burns' licensed premises, 14 Duke Street, in O'Connell Street Lower, outside Graham Lemon's when the dark man had placed in his hand a throwaway, subsequently thrown away, advertising Elijah, restorer of the church in Zion, in Lincoln Place outside the premises of F.W. Swaney & Co. Limited, dispensing chemists, when Frederick M. Bantam Lyons had rapidly and successively requested, perused and restituted the copy of the current issue of the Freeman's Journal and National Press which he had been about to throw away, subsequently thrown away, he had proceeded towards the oriental edifice of the Turkish and Warm Baths, 11 Leinster Street, with the light of inspiration shining in his countenance and bearing in his arms the secret of the race, graven in the language of prediction. What qualifying considerations led his perturbations? The difficulties of interpretation, since the significance of any event followed its occurrence as variably as the acoustic report followed the electrical discharge, and of counterestimating against an actual loss by failure to interpret the total sum of possible losses proceeding originally from a successful interpretation. His mood. He had not risked, he did not expect, he had not been disappointed, he was satisfied. What satisfied him? To have sustained no positive loss. to have brought a positive gain to others. Flight to the Gentiles. How did Bloom prepare a collation for a Gentile? He poured into 2 teacups 2 level spoonfuls, 4 in all, of Ipsos soluble cocoa and proceeded according to the directions for use printed on the label, to each adding after sufficient time for infusion the prescribed ingredients for diffusion and the manner and the quantity prescribed. What supererogatory marks of special hospitality did the host show his guest? Relinquishing his symposiacal right to the mustache cup of imitation crown derby presented to him by his only daughter, Millicent Millie, he substituted a cup identical with that of his guest and served extraordinarily to his guest and, in reduced measure, to himself the viscous cream ordinarily reserved for the breakfast of his wife Marian Molly. Was the guest conscious of and did he acknowledge these marks of hospitality? His attention was directed to them by his host jocosely, and he accepted them seriously as they drank in the serious silence Ipsos mass product, the creature cocoa. Were there marks of hospitality which he contemplated but suppressed, reserving them for another and for himself on future occasions to complete the act begun? The reparation of a fissure of the length of 1 1/2 inches in the right side of his guest's jacket. A gift to his guest of one of the 4 ladies' handkerchiefs, if and when ascertained to be in a presentable condition. Who drank more quickly? Bloom, having the advantage of 10 seconds at the initiation and taking, from the concave surface of the spoon along the handle of which a steady flow of heat was conducted, 3 sips to his opponent's 1, 6 to 2, 9 to 3. What cerebration accompanied his frequentative act? Concluding by inspection but erroneously that his silent companion was engaged in mental composition, he reflected on the pleasures derived from literature of instruction rather than of amusement, as he himself had applied to the works of William Shakespeare more than once for the solution of difficult problems in imaginary and real life. Had he found their solution? In spite of careful and repeated reading of certain classical passages, aided by a glossary, he had derived imperfect conviction from the text, the answers not bearing in all points. What lines concluded his first piece of original verse written by him, potential poet, at the age of 11 in 1877 on the occasion of the offering of 3 prizes of 10/-, 5/- and 2/6 respectively for competition by the Shamrock, a weekly newspaper. An ambition to squint at my verses in print makes me hope that for these you will find room. If you so condescend, then please place at the end the name of yours truly, L. Bloom. Did he find 4 separating forces between his temporary guest and him? Name, age, race, creed. What anagrams had he made on his name and youth? Leopold Bloom Elpod Bamu. Muldo Pelu Balapedum Oldalabo, MP. What acrostic upon the abbreviation of his first name had he? Carnatic poet, sent to Miss Marian Molly Tweedy on the 14th of February 1888. Poets oft have sung in rhyme of music sweet their praise divine. Let them hymn at night times 9. Dearer far than song or wine. You are mine. The world is mine. What had prevented him from completing a topical song, music by R.G. Johnston, on the events of the past, or fixtures for the actual years, entitled If Brian Boru Could But Come Back and Sealed Dublin Now, commissioned by Michael Gunn, lessee of the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street, and to be introduced into the 6th scene, The Valley of Diamonds, of the 2nd edition, the 30th of January 1893, of the Grand Annual Christmas Pantomime Sinbad and the Sailor, produced by R. Shelton the 26th of December 1892, written by Greenleaf Whittier, scenery by George A. Jackson and Cecil Hicks, costumes by Mrs. and Miss Wellen under the personal supervision of Mrs. Michael Gunn, ballets by Jessie Noir, Harlequinade by Thomas Otto, and sung by Nellie Bouver's principal girl. Firstly, oscillation between events of imperial and of local interest. The anticipated Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria, born 1820, succeeded 1837, and the post-anticipated opening of the new municipal fish market. Secondly, apprehension of opposition from extreme circles on the questions of the respective visits of their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of York, real, and of His Majesty King Brian Boru, imaginary. Thirdly, a conflict between professional etiquette and professional emulation concerning the recent erections of the Grand Lyric Hall on Berg Quay and the Theatre Royal in Hunt Street. Fourthly, distraction resultant from compassion for Nellie Bouver's non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical expression of countenance and concupiscence caused by Nellie Bouver's revelations of white articles of non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical underclothing while she, Nellie Bouver, was in the articles. Fifthly, the difficulties of the selection of appropriate music and humorous allusions from Everybody's Book of Jokes, 1,000 pages and a laugh in every one. Sixthly, the rhymes, homophonous and cacophonous, associated with the names of the new Lord Mayor, Daniel Talon, the new High Sheriff, Thomas Powell, and the new Solicitor General, Dunbar Plunkett Barton. What relation existed between their ages? 16 years before in 1880 when Bloom was of Stephen's present age Stephen was 6. 16 years after in 1920 when Stephen would be at Bloom's present age Bloom would be 54. In 1936 when Bloom would be 70 and Stephen 54 their ages initially in the ratio of 16 to 0 would be as 17 1/2 to 13 1/2, the proportion increasing and the disparity diminishing according as arbitrary future years were added. For if the proportion existing in 1883 had continued immutable, conceiving that to be possible, till in 1904 when Stephen was 22 Bloom would be 374 and in 1920 when Stephen would be 38, as Bloom then was, Bloom would be 646 while in 1952 when Stephen would have attained the maximum post-Diluvian age of 70 Bloom, being 1190 years alive having been born in the year 714, would have surpassed by 221 years the maximum antediluvian age, that of Methuselah, 969 years, while, if Stephen would continue to live until he would attain that age in the year 3072 AD, Bloom would have been obliged to have been alive 83,300 years, having been obliged to have been born in the year 81,396 BC. What events might nullify these calculations? The cessation of existence of both are either the inauguration of a new era or calendar, the annihilation of the world and consequent extermination of the human species, inevitable but unpredictable. How many previous encounters proved their pre-existing acquaintance? 2. The first in the Leal garden of Matthew Dillon's house, Medina Villa, Kimmage Road, Round Town, in 1887, in the company of Stephen's mother, Stephen being then of the age of 5 and reluctant to give his hand in salutation. The second in the coffee room of Breslin's Hotel on the rainy Sunday in January of 1892, in the company of Stephen's father and Stephen's granduncle, Stephen being then 5 years older. Did Bloom accept the invitation to dinner given then by the son and afterwards seconded by the father? Very gratefully, with grateful appreciation, with sincere appreciative gratitude, and appreciatively grateful sincerity of regret, he declined. Did their conversation on the subject of these reminiscences reveal a third connecting link between them? Mrs. Reardon Dante, a widow of independent means, had resided in the house of Stephen's parents from the 1st of September 1888 to the 29th of December 1891 and had also resided during the years 1892, 1893 and 1894 in the City Arms Hotel owned by Elizabeth O'Dowd at 54 Prussia Street where, during parts of the years 1893 and 1894, she had been a constant informant of Bloom who resided also in the same hotel, being at that time a clerk in the employment of Joseph Cuff of 5 Smithfield for the superintendence of sales in the adjacent Dublin cattle market on the North Circular Road. Had he performed any special corporal work in mercy for her? He had sometimes propelled her on warm summer evenings, an infirm widow of independent, of limited, means, and her convalescent bath chair with slow revolutions of its wheels as far as the corner of the North Circular Road opposite Mr. Gavin Lowe's place of business where she had remained for certain time scanning through his unknown binocular field glasses unrecognizable citizens on tramcars, roadster bicycles equipped with inflated pneumatic tires, hackney carriages, tandems, private and hired landaus, carts, pony traps and brakes passing from the city to the Phoenix Park and vice versa. Why could he then support that his vigil with the greater equanimity? Because in middle youth he had often sat observing through a rondeau bossed glass of a multicolored pane the spectacle offered with continual changes of the thoroughfare without, pedestrians, quadrupeds, velocipedes, vehicles, passing slowly, quickly, evenly, round and round and round the rim of a round and round precipitous globe. What distinct difference made each of her now 8 years deceased. The older, her bezique cards encounters, her Scott Terrier, her supposititious wealth, her lapses of responsiveness and incipient catarrhal deafness. The younger, her lamp of coals oil before the statue of the Immaculate Conception, her green and maroon brushes for Charles Stewart Parnell and for Michael Devitt, her tissue papers. Were there no means still remaining to him to achieve the rejuvenation which these reminiscences divulged to the younger companion rendered them more desirable? The indoor exercises, formerly intermittently practiced, subsequently abandoned, prescribed and Eugene Sandoz physical strength and how to obtain it which, designed particularly for commercial men engaged in sedentary occupations, were to be made with mental concentration in front of a mirror so as to bring into play the various families of muscles and produce successively a pleasant rigidity, a more pleasant relaxation and the most pleasant repristination of juvenile agility. Had any special agility been his in earlier youth? Though ring weight lifting had been beyond his strength and the full circle gyration beyond his current, yet as a high school scholar he had excelled in his stable and protracted execution of the half-lever movement on the parallel bars in consequence of his abnormally developed abdominal muscles. Did either openly allude to their racial difference? Neither. What, reduced to their simplest reciprocal form, were Bloom's thoughts about Stephen's thoughts about Bloom and about Stephen's thoughts about Bloom's thoughts about Stephen? He thought that he was a Jew, whereas he knew that he was not. What, the enclosures of reticence removed, were their respective parentages? Bloom, only born male transubstantial heir of Rudolf Virg, subsequently Rudolf Bloom of Szombathely, Vienna, Budapest, Milan, London and Dublin, and Ellen Higgins, second daughter of Julius Higgins, born Caroli, and Fanny Higgins, born Hegarty. Stephen, eldest surviving male consubstantial heir of Simon Dedalus of Cork and Dublin, and Mary, daughter of Richard and Christina Goulding, born Grier. Had Bloom and Stephen been baptized, and where and by whom, cleric or layman? Bloom 3 times, by the Reverend Mr. Gilmer Johnston M.A., alone, in the Protestant Church of St. Nicholas without Coombe, by James O'Connor, Philip Gilligan and James Fitzpatrick, together, under a pump in the village of Swords, and by the Reverend Charles Malone C.C., in the Church of the Three Patrons, Rathgar. Stephen once, by the Reverend Charles Malone C.C., alone, in the Church of the Three Patrons, Rathgar. Did they find their educational career similar? Substituting Stephen for Bloom's tomb would have passed successively through a dame's school and the high school. Substituting Bloom for Stephen Bleffen would have passed successively through the preparatory, junior, middle and senior grades of the intermediate and through the matriculation, first arts, second arts and arts degree courses of the Royal University. Why did Bloom refrain from stating that he had frequented the University of Life? Because of his fluctuating incertitude as to whether this observation had or had not been already made by him to Stephen or by Stephen to him. What 2 temperaments did they individually represent? The scientific. The artistic. What proofs did Bloom adduce to prove that his tendency was towards applied, rather than towards pure, science? Certain possible inventions of which he had cogitated when reclining in a state of supine repletion to aid digestion, stimulated by his appreciation of the importance of inventions now common but once revolutionary, for example, the aeronautic parachute, the reflecting telescope, the spiral corkscrew, the safety pin, the mineral water siphon, the canal lock with winch and sluice, the suction pump. Were these inventions principally intended for an improved scheme of kindergarten? Yes, rendering obsolete pop guns, elastic airbladers, games of hazard, catapults. They comprised astronomical kaleidoscopes exhibiting the 12 constellations of the zodiac from Aries to Pisces, miniature mechanical orreries, arithmetical gelatine lozenges, geometrical to correspond to zoological biscuits, globe map-playing balls, historically costumed dolls. What also stimulated him in his cogitations? The financial success achieved by Ephraim Marx and Charles A. James, the former by his 1D bazaar at 42 George's Street, South, the latter at his 6.5D shop and World's Fancy Fair and Waxwork Exhibition at 30 Henry Street, admission second, Children 1D, and the infinite possibilities hitherto unexploited in the modern art of advertisement of condensed and trilateral monoidal symbols, vertically of maximum visibility, horizontally of maximum legibility, deciphered, and of magnetizing efficacy to arrest involuntary attention, to interest, to convince, to decide. Such as K2. Kino's 11/trousers. House of Keys. Alexander J. Keys. Such as not. Look at this long candle. Calculate when it burns out and you receive gratis 1 pair of our special non-combo boots, guaranteed 1 candle power. Address, Barclay and Cook, 18 Talbot Street. Basilicule insect powder. Very best boot blacking. Want it combined pocket blade pink knife with corkscrew, nail file and pipe cleaner. Such as never. What is home without Plumtree's potted meat? Incomplete. With an abode of bliss. Manufactured by George Plumtree, 23 Merchants Quay, Dublin, put up in 4 ounces pots, and inserted by Councillor Joseph Pinanetti, MP, Rotunda Ward, 19 Hardwick Street, under the obituary notices and anniversaries of deceases. The name on the label is Plumtree. A Plumtree in a meat pot, registered trademark. Beware of imitations. Peatment. Trimpley. Mount Pat. Plumtree. Which example did he adduce to induce Stephen to deduce that originality, the producing its own reward, does not invariably conduce to success? His own ideated and rejected project of an illuminated show cart, drawn by a beast of burden, in which 2 smartly dressed girls would be seated engaged in riding. What suggested scene was then constructed by Stephen? Solitary hotel in Mountain Pass. Autumn. Twilight. Fire lit in dark corner. Young man seated. Young woman enters. Restless. Solitary. She says. She goes to window. She stands. She says. Twilight. She thinks. On solitary hotel paper she writes. She thinks. She writes. She sighs. Wheels and hooves. She hurries out. He comes from his dark corner. He sees his solitary paper.